Sunday in the Breakfast Club, and I am Serious Mind. Um, I don't normally respond to other people's videos very much, but and certainly not comments, not as in video form. But I'm going to make an exception this week. Sister Danger did a response to my video, and there were some comments on the video that I think all need to be addressed. So here goes. First, to Sister Danger's points. Um, I have to admit that I didn't finish watching the video because the more I kept listening, the less and less it seemed that her comments really had any relation to anything I was really actually talking about. But I think I need to address those things. Um, One of the hobby I think where Sister Danger got off course from my perspective is this insistence that racism means like what I would call active racist, uh, and conflating racist actions and racist thoughts and behaviors with being racist. And they're not the same thing. First off, this idea that, well, you're only a racist if you sit around shouting nigger all the time or something. She didn't use that example, but something really overt like that. And certainly overt racism exists, and people who engage in that kind of action are racist. But that's not the entire scope of what racism is. And I would also make the point, and I think it's very important, that not everybody who has racist thoughts is a racist. We need to separate the actions and thoughts, and it really is a matter of scale. Um, a bias, something that's biased on a racial basis, uh, certainly very likely to be racist in and of itself. But the person thinking it is only really a racist if the propensity of their thoughts and actions are go down that line. So, and I'll use an example for myself. Well, I'll get away from racism for a second and look at sexism. I have never in my life felt consciously that women were inferior to me in any way or to any other man, um, or that they should be discriminated against or anything. But over the last 20 years, say, I've looked as I've learned more and interact with more people who were active in the social justice community and started to learn, um, and talked more with women about how they feel when how they're treated by men, and realized that some thoughts and some actions and things that I had said, those things were sexist. Now, did that make me a sexist? I don't think so. But those actions, those thoughts, those behaviors of mine were sexist. So over time, I learned to try not to do those and adjust my thinking. Um, so and also too, I mean, as far as this idea from Sister Danger that unless we personally identify as racism or sexism or whatever, that it's not, but just because we don't know, like I don't like somebody, but I don't know why. Well, whether or not you know why, whether you can pin a reason, the genesis of bigotry, that doesn't mean that someone's thoughts or actions aren't bigoted. Again, it doesn't mean that they are necessarily a bigot, but it doesn't change whether or not their actions or thoughts are bigoted. If I decided I didn't like white people, or had this feeling that I didn't like white people, I didn't trust all white people, that's bigoted. That's the whole genesis of bigotry, is the fact that I have some prejudging of people strictly on some superficial characteristic. If I say all white people are untrustworthy, that's a bigoted and I would say racist feeling. I also don't cotton with the idea that some people have in the social justice community that only white people can be racist. I think that's complete horseshit. Anybody can be racist. I think people conflate discrimination and racism. They think that bias plus power equals racism, and it's not. Racism plus power equals discrimination, or at least has the potential for discrimination. Um, and even that's contextual. I'm an employer. There's possible for me to, if I were so inclined to be biased, to be against and discriminate against potential employees or actual employees. So But this idea that, well, if we haven't pinned the genesis or the cause of why someone has a feeling or thought, um, that we can't put a label on it. The funny thing is that my video wasn't about labeling anybody. If anything, I'm really talking in the abstract, and more on a societal level, because that's really the issue. Somebody in the comments of Sister Danger's video had said that, well, he didn't feel that bias against minorities was really a racial thing because he'd been treated on multiple occasions like a potential criminal by the police, and so he didn't feel this was an exclusive purview of race. And of course it's not. It has nothing. It's not. Has any, I think it's another place where people go wrong. This idea that, well, if we say there's a bias against minorities by the police, that means that there's no other biases that the police hold, and of course there are. But what we can see, if you look at the statistics, statistically speaking, minorities are disproportionately harassed by the police, treated differently, more likely to be arrested, more likely to be convicted, and more likely to get longer sentences. Just for example, so this idea that, well, it can't be biased because it happens to white people too. Well, the bias is that, yes, it happens to white people. It happens way more per capita to other people, and that's where the problem exists. I mean, when we talk about police brutality, what I've been trying to explain to a lot of people is that we have two problems. We have right now we have a problem of police um, overstepping their bounds, and then we have racial bias. And when you add those together, what you end up with is you have police using excessive force against white people, which is wrong, always wrong, and then you have that doing even more against racial minorities. So these are two things that are coming together. If police didn't have a power problem, we probably would still see those things happening to minorities, but less often than they do right now. So and then trying to use ice cream as an example. I know she was trying to make an analogy, but it's a really poor analogy. Got That Funk addressed that. If it's like, well, I don't like ice cream, or I don't like vanilla ice cream. Well, that has nothing to do. That's has to do with characteristics that have something to do with ice cream, whether it's the taste or the smell, the texture. That's something inherent to ice cream. But if I say I don't like white people, well, even if I have, whether it's because I had a bad experience with white people, or I have continual bad experiences with white people, or whatever, but I'm still making a bias, and I'm making a prejudgment about everybody from that group. It's comparing ice cream, where you could have, a something, your biases are going to be based on something about the characteristics of that ice cream, whereas if you lump people into a category like that, what you're doing then is you're taking, even if that characteristic, even if there's some basis for it, you're still lumping individuals together and not viewing them as individuals, and you're taking them as the group, and that's what prejudice is. Steve Shives made a video a while back talking about people who lump Muslims together and he called them bigots. And Meridian Frost responded, quite angrily to that video. And now I've hung out with Meridian Frost. I would say I don't think he's a bigot, but what was interesting in his response to Steve is that he said that when he sees a Muslim man, he thinks, thus and so. And, as I said, the Dark Matter, when I hang out with Shayra regarding that response, I said, look, I know Josh isn't a bigot, but when you say, when I see a Muslim man, I think certain things about him, well, that is the genesis of where bigotry comes from. So is Josh a bigot? No, but that's the first step down the road. That's what it is, and that is a bigoted, that's a bias that he has. And if it's one thing, if you want to judge people based on their specific individual behavior, that's fair. But if you lump people in and say, well, you share some superficial characteristic with somebody, and I don't like what they did, so I'm going to assume that you will behave the same way, that is bigotry, whether it's against black people, white people, Latinos, Asian people, whatever. And whether or not I can put my finger on it, or you can put your finger on it, and it doesn't really matter whether we know, and I'm not really even, I don't really care about whether we label it or not. Whether we label it or not, it is what it is. I think, and the things I think that's a little disappointing about the whole thing. Obviously, people don't like to be challenged when it comes to their biases. It's not, it's an uncomfortable subject, regardless whatever the biases are. But being challenged and addressing our biases, if we know that we have biases, then the appropriate thing, or the best thing, in my opinion at least, is that we do our best to address them and try to weed them out as best we can. Uh, you know, if we spend all our time, complaining about how we don't like how it's labeled or how it's viewed or whatever like that, and we then we're not really addressing our bias at all, and we're not growing. You know, that growth really comes through struggle. So I think that rather than having this fairly superficial view of what racism or sexism is, I call it's kind of like the Snidely Whiplash view of villainy. That the evil guy is the one who sits there, wringing his hands and cackling, and of course, evil people are just like everybody else. They what makes them evil is what they're willing to do to get what they want. Hitler liked dogs and he liked children, but he was still evil. So whether or not, and I bet you Hitler didn't think of himself as evil, he didn't think of himself as a bigot. In his mind, he felt that Jews were inferior and Slavic people were inferior, and he never would have ever seen himself that way, even though he obviously had bigoted views against a lot of people. So the other thing I wanted to address too, there was a comment where someone said that they were upset because they felt that on the one hand I was reaching out to white men and saying we need to reach out to them and include them because white men have some legitimate gripes, but that somehow then I was calling them stupid. And again, this is from a very superficial and I want to say juvenile view of because first of all, I didn't say anything remotely like that at all, not even the slightest. But this apparently what this person took issue with is the fact that I said that they were being misled, manipulated, deceived, and obviously in this person's mind that if you say someone's being deceived, you're saying they're stupid, and that is ludicrous, particularly when we're talking about these big societal things. Because it's totally ignoring social conditioning. This is just like everyone who is religious, they believe things. I'm an atheist. I think they believe things that are false. I think they're being deceived. I do not at all think they're stupid, and it's not necessary for someone to be stupid to be deceived. Particularly when the people that are doing the deception are hitting on those things that affect us in visceral ways. That we're humans, and as much as we're all individuals, we're also very predictable as a group. And that's what people who engage in deception often prey on. And the ones that are very good on that, they know how to read people, they know how to manipulate people. Very smart people very often get manipulated into making very bad choices. It has nothing to do with your intelligence or intellect or anything like that. So I think we need to stop. It's funny because the person that was replying, I'm sure this is somebody who rails about political correctness and says that we shouldn't look for ways to be offended, and yet I find that the people who complain about political correctness find plenty of ways to be offended that have nothing to do with what's going on. So anyway, that's what I have to say, it's unfortunate that people don't really seem to want to look at this and really see it for what it is. Anyway, catch you guys next week.